So you're planning to come to Canada in 2024. Welcome and good luck. Here's what to expect. I've lived in Canada almost my whole life. I'm a dual citizen, I'm half Canadian, half American, and I was a flight attendant, so I've traveled to most provinces and lived in many towns and cities. So I have a pretty good idea of what I'm talking about here. I'm also planning on leaving Canada in 2024. So here's what you need to know. Generally speaking, life in Canada has been getting harder. I would say from 2019 before 2020, life was comfortable here. You could work a single job and be able to pay your rent and still have some money left over. Looking back to 2016, I was able to rent a place with a few roommates in college for around $500 a month. That same room is now going for $1,000, meaning it's doubled, but my salary hasn't doubled. Meanwhile, during the pandemic of 2020, most businesses in Canada closed. During this time, I was working as a server at a restaurant in Vancouver. Speaking of Vancouver, it's a great city. Everyone's nice. It's full of happy, stoned Canadians. Anyways, I was making around $2,000 a month in Vancouver working as a server. When the restaurant closed down due to the pandemic, my salary actually increased. The government provided checks that was $4,000 a month, so I doubled my salary while not working at all. While this was great for the time being, it skyrocketed inflation. With massive immigration and skyrocketing inflation, gas prices went up 15%, home heating went up 14%, and a date with the Kardashian sister went up 1,000%. But seriously, I left Vancouver and moved to Toronto. I had 5 roommates, and I was paying $900 for a room. And that was considered a good deal. In 2024, that exact same room cost $1,200 or more. Mind you, everything I say is in Canadian dollars, so please do the currency exchange for your own country to get a better idea, as the Canadian dollar is a little bit different than the American dollar. So let's talk a little bit about salaries in Canada. In 2022, I started working for a bank in Canada, and my monthly income was around $3,000, which is about $25 an hour. This is higher than most immigrants will make. When you first come to Canada, don't expect to make a lot unless you're a computer programmer or you're in the tech sector. Then likely you'll be making close to $80,000 or more. So anyways, I make $50,000 a year. Of that $3,000 a month, I was left with about $500 of savings at the end of every month. And even that wasn't enough for me. I left Toronto to move back home with my parents at 28 years old so I could save money. It's kind of awkward being 30 and still living at home with your parents, but this is the reality of Canada. This is the reality. Most Canadians you meet when you come to Canada still live with their parents well into their 30s. This is because Canadian house prices are unaffordable. They are over $1 million Canadian, and with a salary of $50,000, I can just never afford it. So if you're looking for a Canadian boyfriend or girlfriend when you move here, get ready to meet their parents because they still live with them. So what does this mean for you as an immigrant coming to Canada? Likely, you're going to start working a minimum wage job, which you'll probably make around $2,200 a month. If you're in a big city, this means you're going to be renting with roommates, probably 4 to 5 roommates, living in one house, so say goodbye to your privacy. People will steal your stuff from the fridge, leave dirty dishes, not clean the washroom. I can't stand it. And it's still going to cost you half your salary to live with these people. So the things I just mentioned primarily exist in 2 cities, Toronto and Vancouver, as well as the surrounding areas. So when I say Toronto, I mean the greater Toronto area. This includes like Mississauga, Newmarket, Markham, and for Vancouver, I'm talking about Victoria as well, Whistler, Burnaby. So what are your options as a immigrant? You want to come to Canada, but you want a better life than this. Because if you want to experience Canada, you want to go skiing and snowboarding and whale watching, hiking, renting a car, driving to the nature places. You're not going to be able to do that with a minimum wage salary. You're going to be working 2 jobs. You're going to be so tired. It's not going to be worth it. So, you want to come to Canada in 2024. My recommendation, stay away from Toronto and Vancouver. There's plenty of other nice cities that are cheaper, more affordable, and will still give you a good life. My advice is to look east. If you speak a little bit of French or are interested in learning French, Montreal is a great choice. It's one of the more expensive ones on the list, but it's a big city with good public transit system, good ways to get around. Housing is a lot cheaper, but you might need to learn some French. You can continue on eastward towards New Brunswick. 2 major cities there are Moncton and Fredericton. These are smaller, more countryside cities, but they still have decent jobs, things to do, and a much cheaper living, although it is rising. Even further east, you can check out Halifax or St. John's. St. John's is a pretty unique part of Canada. They have their own dialect. They speak English a little bit different than the rest of us, but it's relatively cheap, and while the salaries are lower there, I think it's offset by the cost of housing and everything else being lower as well. My personal favorite is Halifax. This is the port city of Nova Scotia and the biggest city within Nova Scotia. They have a beautiful boardwalk and waterfront, as well as like a shipping industry where you can make a decent salary. Housing costs are much lower than Toronto and Vancouver. Many people from my hometown ended up moving there and buying a house because it was just affordable. If you're looking west, Alberta and Saskatchewan are 2 options. You've got Calgary and Edmonton in Alberta, which Calgary's on the rise of being unaffordable, but it's a great city and you can make a much higher salary there than you can in Vancouver or Toronto. And Edmonton is a city with over 1 million people, and it's one of the cheapest big cities to live in, as well as it has the Edmonton Mall, which is the biggest mall in Canada. I highly recommend checking that out. Over to Saskatchewan, you've got Regina and Saskatoon. These are just 2 medium-sized cities. Saskatchewan's very, very cheap. The salaries are lower. They have their own telephone lines, which is different than the rest of Canada. They have Saskatel versus rest of Canada uses Bell or Rogers or TELUS. So there is some advantages to that. To be honest, Saskatchewan, it's mostly flat farmland. So if that's your thing, I'd say go for it. And towards the middle of Canada, we've got Manitoba, which is definitely the coldest province. If you want the big city vibes, I don't know, it's hard to recommend Manitoba. Yeah, it's cheaper. You can afford your own place with 1 job. You can have your own apartment, but you're going to be freezing, especially if you're coming from like a warm place like the Philippines or Indonesia or India or something like that. If you go to Manitoba, you're going to hate it. I can't stand it, and I'm Canadian. It's too cold. So I want to give you guys some more perspective from an immigrant who moved to Vancouver. This is my friend. I worked with him in Doha, Qatar, where I was making $4,000 a month in Qatar, which is more than I've ever made in Canada. So the Middle East, I can make a lot more money than Canada. This is Kayaman, who moved to Vancouver. So just to recap, the reality is Canada's very expensive. You're going to live with roommates. You're going to make probably when you first get here, a low salary, which you won't have any money to do fun activities. So while Canada's safe and friendly and nice, everyone's very, very generous here and friendly, we do have some problems. The weather, certain parts of the country are just too cold. That's why people move to Toronto and Vancouver, as the weather's a little bit milder there. As I say this, I'm looking outside right now and it's a complete snowstorm in Niagara. But this is the reality of the Canadian life. we are taxed heavily. So if you do make a high salary, expect a good chunk of that to go back to the government. Everything you purchase here has a tax on it, and we also have to tip. So a typical meal at a restaurant might cost $30. I would say $30 is pretty average if you want to go for dinner for yourself. Comparing a bowl of ramen in Japan, it was $7. A bowl of ramen in Toronto is about $25. So it's more than triple the price. And for myself, I am leaving Canada in April of this year. I will be doing a working holiday in Japan where I'm hoping I can extend and stay forever. Outside of Tokyo, Japanese houses are much more affordable. Tokyo's a little bit more expensive, but it really is. They have such a good train system, and the work culture, I've heard it's tough, but I want to try it. I don't mind working overtime if I get a better lifestyle, if I enjoy my job. I will admit, I do love my job now in Canada. Working for a bank is a great industry in Canada. I do recommend it. If you come here and you can get a job at a bank, they don't push you to overwork. They don't want to stress you out. I work from home, and the management, my boss, the whole team I work with, everyone is great. So I do love my job in Canada. It's just, I can't even move out with a $50K salary. So if you want to follow me on my journey to Japan, please like and subscribe. This also helps the channel grow, as I will be producing more Canadian content until I move to Japan, where I'll start producing Japanese content. I also talk about nostalgic things. I talk about celebrities. I talk about what happened to certain types of people, internet famous people who disappeared. I'm also thinking of starting a Patreon. If you do want to support me, there will be some perks. I am also an English teacher as well. So I do small group English lessons that are very, very affordable. We are taking on new students. You can just leave a comment or message me on Instagram. My Instagram is right here, Cameron Explores. English classes, the small group lessons start from $10 a lesson. It's very affordable. So yeah, subscribe, and I will see you next time.